Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Humankind, and I'm the Strategic Communications Director at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. I'm pleased to join you today on this Cultural Marathon webinar, organized by our Ministry's very own Office of Culture and Public Diplomacy. COVID-19 tested the world's abilities as countries and international institutions cope with a crisis that is unprecedented in modern history. While the pandemic has tested health infrastructures and economies, it also tested operating models for businesses and for diplomacy. Diplomats, like other professionals, had to find creative and innovative ways to operate in the absence of face-to-face meetings with counterparts. And it's been a test for those of us with a responsibility to communicate on behalf of governments in an environment of great uncertainty and difficulty. It's also been a time when city and community outreach have flourished in different corners of the world. And in the UAE, like in other countries, there are aspects of this pandemic we were well prepared for, and others that required us to mobilize quickly for a completely new challenge. In many respects, the UAE is culturally, politically, and economically suited to a high level of uncertainty and change. We have experienced more of it over our 50-year history than most. We have come to build resilience and adaptability into the UAE model. We never really settled, and instead, we always aim to position innovation and growth at the center of our development. We're always seeking new opportunities to move forward and evolve, and I don't think this crisis is any different. At the same time, we know that evolution brings risk, especially if others do not evolve with you. No country can prosper alone in their region. This is why we've always sought sustainable and responsible growth, and we try to use our success to lift and stabilize our region. In a global health crisis, this responsibility is greater than ever, where health security can only be achieved collectively. Many people have asked how the UAE has changed as a result of this crisis. I find this question difficult to answer personally. It was already part of our DNA to expect the unexpected, so I don't think our core identity will change. However, one can't deny how much we have learned from this experience. And if there is one thing we have learned and continue to witness, it is the resilience of humankind in the face of this immense challenge. All over the world, we've seen people come together in solidarity to assist those in need, and I'm hopeful that some of the incredible acts of kindness and generosity and community spirit we've seen throughout this pandemic will have a lasting effect on our society. So how will the world change as a result of this crisis? And what has already changed for the long term? Will there be a long-lasting impact on our culture and society? Is this a new paradigm shift, or is this all just a temporary deviation from business as usual? To discuss this and help us answer some of these questions, I'm joined by three very distinguished guests, all of whom seem to have successfully navigated these uncharted waters, both as representatives of their governments and as communicators to their constituents in the UAE. The Ambassador of the Republic of Singapore to the UAE, His Excellency Kamal Vaswani, the Ambassador of the French Republic to the UAE, His Excellency Ludovic Pouy, and the Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany to the UAE, His Excellency Peter Fischer. Welcome to you all. I'd like to start by asking each of you for your impressions on how COVID-19 pandemic has impacted your own nations, and any lessons you think can be drawn from your country. Perhaps if I start with Ambassador Fischer, what has Germany's experience been?
Well, thank you very much, Hen, and let me start by thanking you for this great initiative. It's important and it's timely. And I would also like to say I'm delighted to share this panel with my colleagues from France and Singapore and with you. In short, three of my favorite countries. And I think listeners and viewers will see a great deal of consensus on this panel. I believe the world is at a critical juncture. And as you said, the question is really, will we learn the lessons from COVID? And more importantly, will we act on it? And we have COVID. As if that wasn't enough of a challenge, I think we have two additional crises that are going on. One is a crisis of justice, emanating from the streets of Minneapolis, the killing of George Floyd. The Black Lives Matter campaign is sweeping across the world. And it's reminding us of something that we knew, but which we haven't acted on enough, that we're all born equal and we share the same dignity. Another layer, an additional crisis, is the climate crisis. The Fridays for Future movement. The young people around the world have been hitting the streets, demanding protection of our natural environment, climate change. And it also reminds us of something that we actually know, but we haven't been acting on enough, that we're depleting the resources of our planet faster than they can regenerate, and that if we keep depositing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we will be threatening the security and the livelihood of millions, and the repercussions will be more serious than COVID-19. So big crisis, but big opportunity. The opportunity is to move the world towards a safer, a more just, and a more sustainable way of doing things. What does that mean? At home, in our own countries, those who did more or less or relatively well in this crisis were countries where there was a level of trust between the citizens and the government. It works both ways. Citizens have to trust the government has to trust the citizens. And how does that come about? By good governance. And the countries that were assuring basic public goods for their citizens: health, education, and a minimum of social security. So public goods at home, and internationally in our foreign policy orientation, we also need to strengthen our cooperation to safeguard global public goods. And again, that's health, security, and sustainability. We think in Germany and in the European Union, if I may say so, that global issues require global solutions. And in our Diplo-speak, that means multilateral cooperation, strengthening the multilateral system, United Nations, at home, Germany, France. It's in our DNA already because of the European Union. We want the rule of law. We don't want the rule of the stronger. And to conclude my opening remarks, a crisis like this, which is a giant threefold crisis, can really help to focus the mind. I think the last time Germany experienced a crisis of this strength was at the end of World War II, when Nazism was defeated, when Germany lay destroyed with a lost war. And we drew some lessons from it, and they were the lessons that I mentioned, but we need to amplify those. And in Europe, also after World War II, we drew this lesson to work in a multilateral way and to have very strong partnerships. And I should mention that our strongest and closest partnership is with France. Those are, I think, initial remarks I'd like to make.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you. Ambassador Fui?
Yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Dean, for bringing us to this very important initiative and meeting with my two great friends, ambassadors of Germany and Singapore. I fully share the opening remarks of my friend Peter. I can concur with all what has been said. I would like maybe to add a few points on what happened also in France. what strikes me after this, we are still in the middle of the crisis, but after the 3 first months of the crisis, that first of all, we have been strongly impacted. We have suffered important losses in Europe and also in the rest of the world. Almost 30,000 French citizens died of the virus, and I would like to pay tribute to the victims the victims and the families, and in France, in the UAE, and also all over the world. It's of course too early to draw a final conclusion on our national experience, but some reports have already established that measures taken by the French government, implemented very responsibly by the French people, has saved a great number of lives, which is the most important. The 2-month strict lockdown from the 17th of March to the 11th of May has been widely respected, and we managed to bend the curve, as we said, and this helped, of course, our hospitals to stay afloat. President Macron has established a scientific committee at the presidency, and some of the best French doctors, researchers, experts were gathered on a regular basis to help the government decide on the measures to take and to follow up of the evolution of COVID-19 on French soil. And of course, this was done in full transparency with the people. I want to say that the second lesson we draw is that our medical staff, but also many sectors of the French society have participated in the battle. The president said even the war against the COVID-19. Our armed forces were mobilized, school teachers were mobilized, our industries adapted their manufacture so that they could create and manufacture protective and medical equipment. The national company Air France assisted the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs to repatriate 130,000 French citizens around the world. And there were so many gestures of solidarity, simple solidarity on a daily basis from our citizens. The second lesson is that at the European level, we have seen huge solidarity, especially between France and Germany. I want really to thank our German partners, friends and allies for their help all along the crisis. They opened their hospitals, their border to our, the people affected by the COVID. We have had exchanges of doctors, nurses for the border. So this solidarity was really the proof that the European Union was not only alive, but necessary for all citizens. So if I may just conclude my remarks by 3 main lessons so far of the crisis. First, I think that we are surrounded by everyday heroes that were unknown or not recognized enough, before the pandemic. Doctors, nurses, teachers, police agents, daily workers. And this has to be, the lessons has to be drawn, for the future. And this is part also of the justice mentioned by Peter. The second takeaway, I think we should strengthen the resilience of our societies through mechanism of crisis anticipation, but also transnational solidarity. And we should take the lessons from what has been done on the ground, on the spot, for future governance. And the last lesson, which will be, I guess, mentioned during our session today, is how to reinforce multilateralism and international cooperation. We need more and not less international cooperation to face global challenges, health change, but also the climate change challenge, and of course, peace and security challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you. Ambassador Vaswani, you just moved to the country several months. We still didn't get the opportunity to meet face to face, but I know I enjoy keeping in touch with you regularly and hearing about what Singapore is doing. Can you share with us, and perhaps with some of our viewers who are not as familiar with Singapore's experience in handling this pandemic, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Hand. Thank you, Peter, Ludovic. It's good to meet all of you. Ludovic is the only person I met in person, as I mentioned earlier. And I've met more people through video calls than I have in person. But these are the times you adapt. And thank you for this initiative by yourself and by MOFA. Singapore is now gradually and very progressively and in a very calibrated fashion opening up after what we call the circuit breaker, effectively a lockdown. By way of numbers, we have about 39,000 cases in total in Singapore. More than 26,000 have been discharged so far. 12,000 are currently active. Importantly, we have kept fatalities quite low. 25 people have died so far. Community transmission is low and under control. Slowly but surely, we are getting the spike in cases in the foreign worker dormitories in control. We and the United Arab Emirates, we have similar issues with the dormitories. So basically, with things a little bit more under control, it's given us the confidence to open up a little bit in a very calibrated, slow process. Right now, we're calling it a safe opening, then a safe transition, and hopefully we get to what we hope to be a safe nation. We see this, I think we are under no illusions. We see this as a long-term challenge. COVID is unlikely to disappear suddenly. We hope that it does, but it's probably going to be here for a while. So we will have to work within what we call a COVID normal society. We experienced SARS in 2003. I was back home as well. Comparatively, this is much more serious. It is more contagious. Moreover, while SARS was very much a regional issue, this is a global issue and requires a global response. Indeed, listening to Peter and Ludovic, it's like we have the same talking points on this. However, the one thing about SARS was that it made us ramp up our healthcare system, and that is holding us in good stead to deal with such issues at this point in time. Peter probably experienced this personally when he was in Singapore. COVID has had a major impact on Singapore. It is a health issue, yes. It is an economic issue. It is also a social issue. On the health side, well, the reality, a vaccine is not an immediate sight. 4 things have proven critical, and I think these are fairly common across the board among all 4 countries here. First, social distancing, self-explanatory. People sort of focused on what is happening in the worker dormitories, but in a sense, this is a problem of social distancing. It's analogous to what happens on aircraft carriers, on cruise liners, and in any areas where you are in close proximity. So social distancing is key. Second, hand hygiene, really basic. But this is one of the simplest strategies to deal with these issues. I think I watched a Sesame Street episode, and they were talking about washing your hands and singing happy birthday twice. It's a very basic, but simple solution. Third, masking. It's part and parcel of our lives now. All of us do it. Fourth, contact tracing to contain infection. Again, self-explanatory, but technology has proven useful with contact tracing apps. Contact tracing can be a very, time-consuming process. But with contact tracing, it helps the process a lot. These measures that we have done over the past 2 months, they are going to remain in place as we gradually open up. We're also wrapping up our medical as well as our testing capabilities, because this, like I said, is going to be a long-term issue. We've also stepped up our vaccine manufacturing capabilities for when we need to deal with this issue. On the economic front, the numbers are staggering. Our GDP is projected to shrink by between 4% and 7% this year, which will be the worst contraction for us since our independence in 1965. The government has intervened with about 4 budgets so far, totaling 100 billion Singapore dollars, about 260 billion dirhams, 20% of our GDP. The government's immediate focus has been on preserving jobs. Going forward, we're talking about creating new jobs as well. And as I was sort of thinking through my remarks for this session, it's sort of the 4 of us here on this panel, we are sort of fortunate to have the ability to work at home. But there are many other people, the nature of their jobs doesn't allow them to work online, to work at home, or to have their work digitalized. And these are the people that we need to be worried about. Like the UAE, we are both open, outward-looking countries. In fact, like all the 4 countries here, trade is our lifeblood. Trade is 3 times our GDP. We cannot afford to stay closed indefinitely. In a similar vein, we need the global supply chains to remain open. This is important for food, it's important for medicines, it's important for a wide variety of things. Like the UAE, 90% of our food is imported. So we are firmly committed, and this is the key word in this entire session, multilateralism. this is critical when dealing with a global issue. And again, to quote Peter, you need global solutions for a global issue. It is also important for when a vaccine is eventually developed. It is critical that it is accessible to everyone. So those are just a few opening thoughts, and I'm happy to contribute to the discussion later on. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ambassador. As I hear all of you speak today, it's really the same issues that different countries are dealing with, and perhaps similar solutions, yet different ways of navigating around these uncharted waters. I want to move into my next question, and I want to discuss the role of prominent international organizations during this pandemic, including the World Health Organization, the UN, the World Food Programme, and the G20. Some of these organizations have faced a high level of scrutiny while helping coordinate the global response to the pandemic. What do you think the role of international institutions and organizations will be in the post-COVID world? Ambassador Fisher?
Thank you. Well, I hope, and I think the role must be stronger. Now, it's it's a matter of debate right now. Some countries are challenging the multilateral system that was established. Some countries are saying it's better to do things on your own in bilateral contexts. Germany does not believe that. We believe, on the contrary, we must strengthen this international system. Because really, what's the alternative? For any particular country to tell everybody else what the right direction is? I don't think any of us want that. And let's take the World Health Organization. Of course, all these organizations aren't perfect. They require scrutiny. They require reform. And any of us who's done multilateral work, which always includes us Europeans, we have European Union meetings all the time, including here, we know it can be cumbersome. It takes a long time, a lot of people in the room, everybody has the same right to speak, and it takes a long time to work out a compromise, to work out consensus that goes forward. But the alternative is the rule of strength, and we don't want that. Take the WHO. There may be this or that point of critique in its immediate response, but it's necessary for the long-term response to COVID. It's also necessary to fight polio, malaria, HIV, AIDS around the world. So these organizations are essential. And Germany has ramped up its support for humanitarian assistance. We are contributing 1.4 billion euros to organizations like the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, World Food Programme, WHO, refugee organizations, Unicef. We had a big conference, as most of you probably registered, co-hosted by the European Union, France, Germany, and others, to raise funds for the global fight against COVID-19, for vaccines, therapy, and diagnostic. We actually raised 1.7 billion euros. Germany contributed 525 million. We're raising our development cooperation by $1 billion, basically to strengthen health systems in African countries. We're increasing our work for crisis prevention and stabilization in, dangerous areas like the Sahel. Well, we also consider the Middle East one of those areas that needs stabilization. The Lake Chad basin, Afghanistan, to bring COVID prevention measures into our existing programs. And we're working also, this may be of interest, in the field of culture through UNESCO. Even in such a crisis, we need to maintain academic exchange, scholarships. We need to maintain the preservation of cultural heritage, which, by the way, will be very important for the, re-emerging economy, cultural heritage and tourism. And we support a culture going digital. So through UNESCO, we're working with other countries to achieve all that. We even set up a fund, it's called Aid Against Isolation, to support religious communities worldwide. When people are in isolation, maybe they'll turn to their religious community. And so we mobilized some money from Germany, so worldwide, to support that kind of work in religious communities. In short, more multilateralism, more multilateral international system, more international organizations, not less, please.
Your mic.
That's what happens when I try to mute myself. Ambassador, thank you, Ambassador. What about in Singapore, Ambassador Vaswani?
Sure. I come from a small country, 700 odd square kilometers and a population of 5.5 million people. I was curious, I Googled, I think the UAE has 83,000 square kilometers, so you're a little bit bigger. Small states can only thrive within a rules-based multilateral system. So again, we come back to this point, where every country has an equal voice and disputes can be settled peacefully. So for a country like Singapore, multilateralism is not an option, but a necessity. This is true whether you look at the global level at institutions like the UN, the WTO, the WHO, or at the regional level at institutions like ASEAN, or the EU for that matter. A challenge like Global-19, a pandemic, and I remember there was a time not too long ago when we were discussing whether it's a pandemic or not, but it is a pandemic, and it is a global issue. It sort of reminded us about how interconnected we are on everything, public health, on the economy. There's a need for coordination in all of these responses. And the multilateral institutions play a vital role in facilitating and coordinating this. It is essential that we resist the urge to turn inwards and discard globalization. A simple case in point right now, all four of us here, our airlines, Lufthansa, Air France, Etihad, Emirates, Singapore Airlines, they're all suffering. Global air travel has come down. Hopefully, slowly, as we open up, global travel goes back online again. For it to actively resume, countries have to come together and establish a set of agreed norms. If everyone imposes their own standards and they do not sync and there's no trust, it is going to be difficult for air travel to resume in a big way. I think right now, countries are looking at individual corridors, and that's a good starting point. But if we want it to go to an earlier era, it's going to take a set of norms. And again, that is multilateralism. It is worth highlighting that this year marks the 75th anniversary of the UN Charter. Despite imperfections in the multilateral system, we are undoubtedly better off because of the UN and multilateralism. Credit must be given to the UN, all the other multilateral institutions for building a more stable world. And I was thinking about this, right now, digitalization is going to be hot. I think COVID is going to accelerate the impact of digitalization. And we, as a global community, will have to deal with it. How do we deal with data-related issues? So at the end of it, more multilateralism is going to be required. Multilateralism is also the best option to deal with many complex global challenges that we're dealing with. And Peter touched upon this. Climate change, terrorism. And the reality is that we're probably going to deal with more pandemics in the future. I think it was Minister for the Future Economy, or Future, Minister Gargawi, who talked about having to deal with disease X that is out there. We also have the governance of cyberspace. International cooperation will also be key to developing a vaccine and to getting us back to the path of a sustainable economic rebuilding and enhancing resilience to deal with future pandemics and other natural disasters. So multilateralism is good, more multilateralism is better. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And what about you, Ambassador? You've spoken about the solidarity of the EU and in specific your relationship with Germany. How has your experience been with international organizations?
Well, France has always been a strong supporter of international organizations and multilateralism. we hear a lot of criticism on what may have been the weaknesses of the multilateral institutions such as the United Nations, the World Health Organization. I would like to remind our audience that those institutions which were born after the Second World War are more essential than ever in order to bring a global response to overcome COVID-19. In this respect, we can only regret that some countries have announced that they will pull out from WHO, which is the only global public health organization, and it has an essential role in the management and of the current crisis, but it's also the only capable organization able to deal with all governments, to coordinate the response, and to rapidly share scientific information. And I want to also congratulate the UAE for the role it plays together with WHO and the Dubai Humanitarian City in order to provide vulnerable countries with equipment and medical items in this crisis. As Peter said, it doesn't mean that everything's perfect. There is, of course, room for improvement, for reform. We must, of course, learn from this crisis to take the necessary steps, I would say, to strengthen the global health architecture, including WHO, to enhance efficiency and emergency response mechanisms. In the post-COVID-19 world, we will need more United Nations, more organization, more cooperation than ever. I think our global priority should be to achieve the UN so-called SDGs, so the Sustainable Development Goals, which cover a very wide range of global challenges. And I would like to recall here, to complement what's been said by Peter and Kamal, that really we had, with many countries, especially Germany and Singapore, launched in April 2019, the Alliance for Multilateralism in New York, which revolves around three ambitions. First, protect, preserve, and advance international law. Second, conduct powerful initiatives where there is a need for further development and thereby reinforcing the multilateral system, in particular where governance is absent or incomplete. And finally, reform and modernize existing international organizations in order to render them more inclusive, representative, democratic, transparent, responsible, and efficient in their functioning and their ability to produce concrete results for citizens. So overall, I believe that this crisis is telling us that we need more multilateral consultation and cooperation, more regulation, so more transparency, certainly, to overcome global challenges, because those challenges, no single country, no single leader can face them alone.
Thank you, Ambassador. I believe we have consensus that amongst there's truly a need for more coordination, and there's a need for international organizations to play more of an active role than they have in the past, and multilateralism is truly the key. If I can just touch upon the UAE side here, we've been ourselves committed to serving as a globally engaged partner to the international organizations and individual nations by intensifying the country's role as a hub and facilitator of commerce, finance, culture, and innovation. In light of the pandemic, we greatly valued working alongside organizations like the WFP and WHO to deliver life-saving aid to countries in need. And I'm very proud to say that to date, the UAE responded by providing 730 metric tons of aid to 64 countries in need, which is supporting a very large number of medical professionals, approximately 730,000 professionals in this process. Our next question is, and if I can go back to you, Ambassador Khoury, from your own experience and also having lived here in the UAE, and you've observed the reactions of our authorities here, can you see any similarities, any differences in the way the UAE and France have dealt with the pandemic, as well as how other countries have dealt with them in relation to France? Are there any common themes?
First, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. First and foremost, I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the UAE leadership for taking the necessary measures to protect its people, national, but also the expats. And I want to highlight the fact that the French community in the UAE, more than 30,000 citizens, French citizens in the UAE, has been 100% supportive of these efforts and have respected the lockdown, the constraints, measures, because they understood that this is for their own safety and the safety of the people in the country. Of course, we have seen that each nation has developed its own strategy to face the COVID-19 crisis for a set of different reasons. I would say, A, because COVID-19, of course, hit all countries at the same time and with the same intensity. B, because some countries had previous experiences of pandemics and they knew immediately how to react, and while others have been, I would say, rather caught by surprise by these pandemics. C, because there are structural differences such as demographics and the age of the population. As you know, we in Europe, we are known as the old continent, and with a majority of elderly people to protect, while the Arab world, for instance, is a much younger region. D, because of we have different structures of the economy, which rely sometimes more or less on the global market and on the state. And E, because, of course, last but not least, of different types of leadership, governance, political systems. I would say that at the end of the day, all countries, despite all those differences, had to rely on the individual and collective responsibility of their citizens to stay at home, to save lives, to respect the barrier gestures and the social distancing. I think everybody understands that this is a personal responsibility first. Of course, we have witnessed a historical moment. We really hope for the best during the summer, and we hope that this pandemic will be behind us in the coming months. And we must, in the meantime, waiting for the vaccine to come, live with this virus and make sure that we all stay safe. And I'm confident that all countries will continue to show responsibility. In the same time, managing, going out of the lockdowns, reopening the economies, reopening tourism, but all this in a very responsible manner.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Vaswani?
Sure. I'm a relative newcomer to UAE and to Abu Dhabi. And but coming here, I landed here on February 23rd, and the lockdown started shortly after. I was seeing what is happening back in Singapore as well. And let me echo the words of my friend's colleague. The UAE has done a tremendous job in terms of managing the whole issue. And I think just to highlight one thing, there are many things that we can highlight, but I like to talk about food security. I mentioned Singapore and the UAE, we both import 90% of our food, but through a variety of keeping supply chains open, the relationship between your Minister for Food Security and the different, there's a Food Alliance, there's a Food Security Committee, the shelves were full. I went to the supermarkets, I like grocery shopping, and everything was available, and that's an important success. But let me touch on the similarities that I see between Singapore and the UAE in managing this crisis. I think the first I would say is the agility of the response. Very quick, very responsive. I think we both tried to take a more gentle approach to see whether we could keep the economy going. Then we realized it was a more serious issue. We went into a lockdown. You did the social distancing, medical care. The extensive testing in the UAE is tremendous. I think now it's almost 3 million tests that we've done. And in addition to that, you've been able to donate test kits to many other countries as well. So the agility of the response. The second is the systematic and comprehensive nature of the response. Like I mentioned at the start, this is an economic issue, a social issue, a healthcare issue. So dealing with it in a very comprehensive approach. Third, I think, is constant communication, and this is your field, Hen, strategic communications. And I think the leadership in the UAE has been very responsive. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed have constantly been communicating and reassuring the public as well. Fourth, the use of technology like contact tracing, and I think this is important about getting a more speedy response to the issue. And I think the fifth point, as all of us are thinking about opening up, we're all thinking about the future. We're thinking about what will, both the post-COVID society look like, but what will a COVID normal society look like? We cannot lock down indefinitely. So both countries are looking to the future. Maybe digitalization is something that will be accelerated. Some jobs will be lost. New jobs have to be created. So how will the future look at? So I think both of us are similar in that how we are dealing with the current, even as we are dealing with the current challenges, we're looking to the future. Thank you.
A lot of similarities shared, Ambassador, and challenges as well. I personally enjoy following your news and seeing how you handle some of these similar issues that both of our countries are facing. I'd like to talk a little bit about how COVID-19 is affecting literally everybody. We're talking about people of all races, religions, cultures, and backgrounds. So the response to this pandemic must set aside these differences in order to help the world overcome this crisis. What responsibility does the international community have to aiding countries, perhaps less advantaged in this fight? And are we, as a global community, doing enough? Ambassador Fisher, any views on the subject?
Yes, I think my initial remark can lead right into your question about kind of development cooperation and working together with less developed and less prosperous countries. But the interesting thing about this panel and about the reaction in the UAE and Germany, Singapore, is that with the exception of Ludovic and I, because we're kind of twins, we're Europeans with very similar culture and history and all that. But let's say Germany, UAE, and Singapore, different history, different geography, different culture, different religion, all that. But we have two things in common. One is, I believe, we all have this good governance and a relatively high level of trust between governments and citizens working both ways. And the other is that we're totally globally interconnected. All of us, we're open economies and we thrive from this connectivity. So that's what's made our response quite similar. And we noted we noted very happily the international outreach by the UAE, and I won't hesitate to also make some political points. The UAE was in touch with Iran, flew medical supplies and protective equipment there. An Etihad plane, twice an Etihad plane landed in Tel Aviv in Israel with material for the Palestinians. These are very important things, really showing that we have to be bold in this critical moment and do things that are beyond what we're used to doing, do new things. And yes, of course we have to help countries that are poor, that have less resources, that might be more impacted. I mentioned Germany is going to mobilize about 2 billion euros for humanitarian help and for the support of health systems everywhere. It's it's not just a matter of health, and the health works both ways. This is a global pandemic. So if it doesn't go away globally, it will never go away for any individual country. But it's also an extension of the themes of justice and of global sustainability that I mentioned initially. Of course, in let's call them developing countries, there's some issues that are their own that we can't resolve. But maybe this triple crisis of COVID, justice, and sustainability can give a push globally to stop fighting for power, to stop fighting for a tactical gain of 10 kilometers here of territory, 10 kilometers there of territory, but to really focus on what's important, as creating a good life for the citizens. And in that effort, the more prosperous countries must stand at the side of less prosperous countries and support them and help them.
You're absolutely right, Ambassador. You've mentioned three common themes that I think unite us in Germany, France, Singapore, and the UAE. You mentioned good governance, the level of trust of our people, as well as connectivity. And I think absolutely these are all crucial components that are aiding our response to this pandemic. Ambassador Puri, is the global response doing enough? Are we doing enough? Is there more that needs to be done?
Well, we can always do more, I would say. But personally, I've been very much impressed by the level of humanitarian assistance deployed since the beginning of the crisis. I would like, of course, to pay tribute to what the UAE have been doing. Peter was mentioning your assistance to Iran and the Palestinians, but I think about to more than 60 countries, and using your position as a hub to help sending material equipment from WHO and the World Food Organization. So it is really remarkable. We should also, I think, be really grateful to all humanitarian actors, of course, the institutions, but also the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, NGOs, charities, who have continued to help and even stepped up their efforts to provide vital assistance to millions of people around the world, especially in war areas like Yemen, Syria, Libya, despite the challenges faced by the COVID-19 pandemic. The second fundamental element I want to mention is that the research for vaccines. I think vaccines will be a public good for humanity. And I want to mention two initiatives, which in my view are very important. The first has been already mentioned by Peter, the launch on May the 4th by WHO and the support of the European Union, Germany, France, and the UAE, and many other partners of the ACT accelerator to speed up the development of the production and the equitable distribution, which is very important, of vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics for COVID-19. And second, the launch on March 22nd of the Discovery Program, which is a European clinical trial against COVID-19, which will evaluate experimental treatments for COVID-19. We have several European countries being part of this initiative. It shows that really the fact that we are working together to fight this pandemic is absolutely essential. Finally, I want to say that at a national level, France is the fifth donor in the world for humanitarian assistance, and it has mobilized many essential means for since the beginning of the pandemics. We have mobilized 1.2 billion euros assistance so far, especially directed towards the vulnerable countries, and notably in Africa. And I think we have to pursue these efforts. We'll have tomorrow a ministerial meeting for the Coalition for the Sahel, and I'm happy that Her Excellency Alim Al-Hashimi will join us for this meeting. which is, of course, very important because Sahel is one of the most challenging regions in the world, both security, economic development levels. So we will need more international cooperation and more involvement from many actors in the world to help our Sahelian friends. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. What about you, Ambassador Aswani? What is your assessment?
Yeah, thank you. Let me also just, I referenced the aid that the UAE had been bringing to various countries around the world. And I also like how these same planes have been mobilized to bring back food and other essentials to the UAE. And it's sort of a system that supports itself. It's a very innovative way of doing things. To answer your question, I think we certainly have a responsibility to do so. We have to help. Moreover, it is in our self-interest because the COVID-19 does not respect national boundaries. There is a need for multilateral and for global coordination on this front. So in Singapore's part, we've done what everyone has done. We've donated money to international organizations, donations of essential medical equipment and supplies. We've also tried to offer expertise. And in our case, we sort of developed a contact tracing application, and we made the source code for the application public so people could leverage on the same platform and not have to reinvent the same wheel. And obviously, we are sharing best practices as well, and also instances when we have not done as well, because I think it's important to learn from each other. One issue that I think is worth focusing on a little bit again is about, and again, it goes back to the theme of multilateralism, of looking outwards. And this is on supply chains as well. And I think a lot of us are interconnected, some more so than others. And it's important that we keep the supply chains open. We keep the goods and essential things like food, medicines, etc., flowing. And this is a critical way in which we can support all other countries as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassadors, we here in the UAE have been and will continue to intensify our efforts as a responsible global citizen. And I thank you for your recognition about the country's aid. We truly believe that there really should be no borders when it comes to supporting other countries in this pandemic. And we continue to strive to be a problem solver. We believe in this crisis. We should see more of a prompt to new efforts at conflict resolution as well. And as we discussed earlier, we truly hope that this unfortunate situation does improve international cooperation. In your views, and perhaps I'll go back to Ambassador, does this crisis present an opportunity to bring parts of the world that don't see eye to eye perhaps closer together, or do you believe this is happening, or is it just wishful thinking?
So who was the question to?
Let's start with Ambassador Pui.
Thank you very much, Hind. Well, as a diplomat, I'm always optimistic. It is my second nature. So I hope you're right that we could see that this crisis represents a positive opportunity to bring parts of the world, to bring more cooperation, to bring also maybe more dialogue between countries who usually take opposite stances. Indeed, my personal belief is that political agendas deserve to be put aside when human lives are at stake, especially at the global level, like during pandemic times. So we can only hope that this crisis will serve as a wake-up call for increased multilateralism and for increased dialogue and cooperation. Unfortunately, I would say this is not happening like within, I would say, with magically. We will not erase from one day to another geopolitical confrontation, and we can see, especially in this region, that unfortunately civil wars and conflicts continue despite the pandemics. And the call of from the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, for a global ceasefire to help fight the pandemic together has not been listened to and respected by many actors in those countries. But this crisis has reminded us that, well, we are all of us in the same boat, and hopefully the cooperation and collaboration that has been achieved in order to overcome the pandemics can later be transformed, I would say, in other common challenges. Of course, we all think about peace and security, but it may be the most difficult and the most challenging issues we have to face together. But more practically, as Peter mentioned in the beginning, climate change, gender equality, the fight against poverty, all these will need global responses. And I think that many countries will look twice after these pandemics by just, I would say, turning away offers for international cooperation to fight those challenges. For France, as a permanent member of the Security Council and we preside the Security Council this month, June, in New York, will continue to play an important role and to face its responsibilities towards all those challenges. And of course, as a founding member of the European Union, I cannot but just add to what Peter said, that European Union will be more than ever a major actor tomorrow. We cannot just let a new Cold War take over after the pandemics, and we will need the European Union to play not only a role in international development and cooperation, but also in politics.
Indeed. Thank you. Ambassador Fischer, are the Germans as optimistic as the French?
This is a philosophical question that is hard to answer, but in this case, on this issue, 100% yes. So, I think you said just wishful thinking. Just wishful thinking. If we have only wishful thinking, without hope, we don't have anything. And as diplomats, of course, we know that hope is not enough. We really need diligent work. We need patience. But we also all know from our own lives, in Germany, we have this word, black pedagogy, which means you learn only when you've experienced some damage, some pain. So not to touch a hot plate because you burned yourself. If the world cannot afford to do that with the issues of health, security, justice, and sustainability, we have to make the adjustments before the damage comes in. Otherwise, it will be too late. So I'm very much an optimist on all this, because what I was trying to say, we all know that as humans, we are able to learn by realizing what needs to be done, not just experiencing the pain. And we do have some hopeful signs. In the European Union, we've done some steps that really show that we've understood we need to be bold as we emerge from this crisis. One is we have the European Green Deal. The EU is committed to be climate neutral by 2050, the first continent. That's a big deal, a bold step and a bold goal. And for a long time, we had different, issues in formulating this, but we did it. And another one is something that France and Germany are leading on. President Macron and Chancellor Merkel proposed an aid fund, a European aid fund financed by 500 billion euros through joint debt issuance. So the European Union jointly issues bonds on the market. It's as if the UAE would jointly issue bonds with Saudi and Oman, or Singapore would issue bonds with Malaysia and Indonesia. If you reflect on that, it's a bold step, and it was long discussed, and our two leaders have now suggested it. We're also going to improve. We had some experiences. As Kamal said, we have to learn from our mistakes. When the crisis hit, we tended to deal with our own case first and close our borders. We even limited the export of medical goods and PPE. And now we're learning from that to set up a system that when another crisis hits, we will share that equipment. And just to add on to what Ludovic said, in international relations, we can't have that if we have disagreements, that the only two policy options are sanctions and a refusal to talk. There has to be another avenue. And I'm optimistic that we will find that.
Optimism is certainly the only way forward. Ambassador Aswani, how's your level of optimism?
Yeah, I think as an individual, I am hopeful. As an individual, I'd like to be optimistic. But as a foreign service officer, I am a realist. And Singapore, as a small country, one of the tenets of our foreign policy is that we take the world as it is, not as we would like it to be. So I think the shared challenges of the global pandemic, there are a lot of common interests at play. I think there's certainly a basis for cooperation. There's also a humanitarian impetus for this. This is useful and important and will certainly forge some trust. But at the same time, we have to be realistic that it's not going to erase disagreements over very intractable issues. But again, to go back to Peter's point, and I think it's an important one, for us as diplomats, you can forge two paths. You can disagree and you can agree at the same time. And I can cooperate on 100 things and I can disagree on a few others. They don't have to be interlinked. Not everything has to be a zero-sum game. Sometimes you can have win-win, and sometimes the other person, helping another person, is in your self-interest as well. And I think going forward, again, I think it's sounding to sound a little bit repetitive, and I think it goes back again to multilateralism and the need to work together to deal with what is a very global issue. And COVID-19 has reminded us that we are all interconnected. And I think what Ludovic said, I think in some of these issues, we shouldn't bring politics into play. It is a humanitarian issue, it's a health issue, and we should let the cooperation proceed on its own steam. If you happen to have spin-off benefits, I think we should consider ourselves fortunate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And on that note, I think the pandemic represents a global crisis, and it's clear that it hasn't affected everyone equally as well. I want to talk a little bit about the lesser fortunate segments of society. We're seeing different individuals and communities handling their most vulnerable populations in different manners, and obviously a lot of it has to do to their own capabilities to manage these situations. If I may ask Ambassador Fisher, how do you believe the respective culture of your country has shaped efforts to help those that are struggling the most?
Yeah, there's a question of culture, but I believe in most cultures there is a culture of helping those that are in need, that are weak, that are suffering. I can't really think of a culture that doesn't incorporate that. Yeah, but there's different governmental and social systems. And I said initially, countries with a social cohesiveness have reaped some benefits during this crisis. And on that question, maybe I can just explain to you a little bit about Germany. Our constitution says we have three constitutional elements. We're a federal state, so like the UAE, we're composed of different states, you say emirates. We're a democratic state, that's our system of government. And the third thing, and few people know this about the German constitution, we are a social state. That means there is a constitutional requirement to help those that are in need. We call it social market economy. We believe in the market, the efficiency of the market, but we have a constitutional requirement to balance the market with measures to help those that are not succeeding in the market for whatever reason. And we have a permanent discussion. Do we have too much social or too much market? And sometimes a government comes in and says, the previous government did too much social, we need more market now. Lower the taxes, lower the regulation. Then the next one comes in and says, raise the taxes, do more government activity, have more regulation to protect people. But we keep a balance in the middle. And in this crisis, our system, I think, has worked well. Our stimulus and relief packages included cash for families, cash for children, unemployment benefits, cash for self-employed and for artists. We reduced the value-added tax by 3 percentage points until the end of the year. It's good for everyone. And a very important scheme that we have is called short-term work. So companies can reduce the working time of their employees, let's say in a car factory, less demand. So they say, okay, your work is reduced by half. And the government will cover 70 to 80% of the wage bill for the company. That way, the company can reduce its work, but hold on to its people. The people get a paycheck, and when demand comes back, the company is ready to go with its own workforce, with its proven workforce. So I think this social element is very important. And if we look around the world, and again, I won't hesitate to be slightly political, the countries that have been preaching maximum economic efficiency and criticizing countries like Germany for having some social expenses and social redundancies, they're unfortunately seeing the downside of not having what we call a social safety net in this kind of a situation. People lose their work, people lose their health care, and there's no system to look after them. That's not a good situation.
Very challenging indeed, Ambassador. Thank you very much. Ambassador Poul, how has France dealt with the segments of society?
What strikes me is that the French people have globally reacted as one nation. French people like to argue regularly, but there was really a common sense of solidarity and of responsibility facing the crisis. Since 1945, and the creation of the so-called Sécurité sociale, the French social security, the French people are very deeply attached to the quality of the universal French healthcare system. It's like in Germany, we have a social state. It was founded on values of solidarity and wealth redistribution. And the French government has taken, like in Germany, many measures right after the beginning of the pandemic, during the lockdown, to help companies, to help families, vulnerables. And this has been, of course, this is costly, but this was necessary to avoid a complete social collapse of the French society. And we think it's absolutely essential to prepare for the next step, prepare for the recovery of the economy, and to maintain a stable society, which is the main challenge, I would say, after the pandemics for many countries in the world. I want to add also that we were all very much surprised of the spontaneity of some initiatives. We have seen, of course, the courage, the dedication of the medical staff, all the people at the front line, but many citizens have also decided to provide their individual support. Many different ways. For instance, we had some French citizens cooking hot meals for the medical staff. We have seen students look out for the elderly neighbors. We have seen also musician artists perform live music on the social media for free. We have seen many companies also, like Decathlon, Air Liquide, LVMH, and others. They shifted their industries towards manufacturing protective equipment, masks, gloves, sanitizers. And finally, France is also a startup nation. We have the very rich startup network, and many tech entrepreneurs came up with innovative platform solutions to help create new bonds of solidarity. And I think this has to stay. Need such energy and dynamism from the society. Of course, the state will be at the core of the recovery efforts, but we will need the efforts of everybody, and everyone will be responsible.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Vaswani, when talking about the less privileged communities, I remember the conversation that we had. God, was it this morning or last night? I'm losing track of time in this quarantine situation. You shared an impressive video of your Prime Minister, and I was quite impressed at the level of measures and professionalism that your country has been dealing with when it comes to workers, which I believe presents quite a challenge for a lot of the countries.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll start off with Singapore as a nation. We're relatively young, 55 years old. Peter served in Singapore when he was a little bit younger. And we're still forging that sense of national identity. We have a pledge that we talk about regardless of race, language, religion. And earlier, I talked about the various grants, the money that is being put out there, the 100 billion Singapore dollars. So that's the whole of government approach. But I think there's a lot of things that is happening at the societal level. So I would call this a whole of society approach, people coming together. Ludovic talked about startups. And again, and I'm reminded of some of the tech things that people have been developing apps to deal with different situations. At the same time, there's a group of people who are not on the digital grid, who have been left out. And we have these small and small hawker centers, where you can get very good local food. Peter was telling me earlier he misses Hokkien mee from Singapore, which is a local dish made at a hawker stall. And a lot of these people with social distancing, with people not being able to go out, they've not been able to sell their wares. Normally it's word of mouth as well. So you've had volunteers who've come up, who've created platforms to help digitize these businesses so that they can advertise, that they can get on the online services as well. And again, this is all voluntary. It's from the ground up. We had some of our foreign workers, we talked about it. Again, a lot of people have sort of understood the contributions that the foreign workers have made to modern Singapore and ground up initiatives to medical kits, all sorts of daily necessities for them. And our PM has, and you rightly pointed out, our PM came out to say that they will get the same level of medical treatment as locals because they have made massive contributions. And one interesting ground up initiative was this girl. We have a number of foreign workers from South Asia, and some of them speak Bengali. It's a language not commonly spoken in Singapore. So what she did on her own initiative, she and her family, she's of Bengali origin, she created a website to help translate basic phrases, to help the frontline workers communicate with the Bengali patients. Then there are many other stories, people who've been coming out to, and I think this is a point that I think it was Ludovic or Peter, I can't recall, an appreciation for nurses, for other healthcare professionals, for the cleaners as well. And I think this is going to make us better as a nation. And people have come out, like voluntary driving services for the healthcare workers. A lot of people are buying food and sending it to the hospitals as well. And it's, I contend that for a young nation like Singapore, COVID-19 has helped to reinforce the sense of self-identity. It has brought us closer together as a nation. And maybe out of adversity, something good comes out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm conscious of the time, and so I will ask one last question, if I may, which is very close to my heart: diplomacy and communications. I want to know and take a look at the role of diplomacy and communications in this crisis. Have you found that your roles have changed with this pandemic as we go through this crisis? Being representatives of your governments in such a dynamic and uncertain situation, is there anything you have learned that will change the way you operate after the pandemic subsides? I'm curious about your personal answers, perhaps. Ambassador Puri?
Yes. Well, I have to confess that for a diplomat, social distancing is not very easy. Our daily work, is to meet people, to visit, our institutions, our partners, and I miss personally a lot my visits to Line, Sharjah, Dubai, the French schools, the French alliances, of course, Sorbonne Abu Dhabi, the Louvre Abu Dhabi, and I really hope that we will be able to go back very soon, to those loved places. And I really hope that the pandemics will not change radically our methods, of work and our social life. But of course, we have completely reshuffled our daily work at the embassy. Nothing was really improvised because we had the contingency plans. So we knew in advance how to reorganize our work. We have established a special task force in the embassy in March, in a few hours, with a special hotline for the French community in the UAE, and also the 15,000 French citizens who were stranded in the UAE. There were tourists happy to be here, and they were blocked because there were no airlines. And so we have worked tirelessly for days and weeks together with the UAE authorities, I think, to help the repatriation of those citizens. I think that this crisis has shed a new light also on the great dedication of and the hidden skills and talents of the diplomatic and consular staff. I was very lucky to have in my team colleagues with previous experiences in some of the most difficult crises, either pandemics or earthquakes. And we were able to manage the crisis with great calm and professionalism, which is, of course, very important when you have a community of 30,000 French citizens to manage. Of course, crisis management is also about communication. You mentioned in the beginning that we were all three communicators. We try to be, I want to say. It's always a challenge because in the current world, communication has to be very well, I would say, controlled. And we are facing, many disinformation, fake news and other. So we have to be very cautious. But our priority was to keep our fellow citizens in the UAE informed of the evolution of the situation, ask them, of course, to comply with the regulations and the instructions given by the Emirati authorities. We had also to quickly identify those of our citizens who were stranded after the closing of borders, but also those who were vulnerable in order to bring some assistance. So, in a nutshell, I would say internally for the embassy, if I may take three takeaways from the crisis. First, be prepared before things get bad. Second, work as a team and make the most of your staff's skills and talents. And three, communication, and communication. Good communication. And finally, if I may add a final word, I would say that despite the lockdown, despite this focus, of course, on the safety of our community, we have continued to work tirelessly with our Emirati partners to enhance our strategic partnership. We were able to reinforce our ambitious bilateral partnership for the implementation of SDGs. And last week, we had the opportunity to hold our 12th session of the strategic dialogue between France and the UAE, which was the occasion to endorse an ambitious bilateral roadmap for the next decade. So we are not just talking about what to do during the pandemics and right after the pandemics, but what we will do together, France and the UAE, between 2020 and 2030. And I'm confident that we will do things together for the benefit of the world, not only in the region, but also in Africa and elsewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Indeed, we're very proud of the strategic partnership we have with France. And if this pandemic has done anything, it certainly has not slowed down our ambitions, nor our agendas that are really, I think they have picked up speed and definitely not slowed down. And the same goes to our relationships with the rest of our allies and our guests here. Ambassador Fisher, what has changed for you here?
Well, I think all the conclusions are still preliminary, but I think we can already see some trends emerging. And like Ludovic, I would agree, diplomacy is the art of bringing people together and of being together with people. So the distancing is a limitation on diplomacy. However, we have discovered that the electronic communications, the digitalization, the video conferences are a good tool and a helpful tool, as our panel today shows. And I have to say, I miss some meetings, but there are some meetings which in the future I hope will just be on the video conference rather than having to go there and to queue and whatnot. The German Foreign Ministry was, we discovered some deficits in our IT. We actually had a poll, and people said, what did not work well in the crisis? And a number of things worked pretty well. I would say especially our people, our teamwork was good. But 100% of the respondents said our IT was not quite where it should be. And so now, Kamal is probably laughing about this, and maybe Hand you are too. Now our ministry is rolling out a 3-year program to make every workplace for Germany-based and local employees also a workplace that is remotely possible from at home. And we're switching from a demand-based system where you used to say, have to explain, this is why I need remote working. I mean, I have it, and I'm well equipped as an ambassador, but many people in the embassy that should have it don't, to a personnel-based. So if you're personnel, you will get this opportunity, but it'll take 3 years to roll out. And that's the one thing. And then, we're also witnessing a competition of the narratives in this crisis. There's 2 or 3 of them floating around, and people are going to great lengths to bring their narrative across. And I think our panel today showed that, yes, we're also promoting our narrative, but our narrative is not that we did everything right, but that we're in this together, we need to learn from this together, and we need to work together on the basis of a fair and true partnership with all willing partners, that's the way forward. I think that's a powerful narrative, and I think it will do well in the competition of narratives.
Very insightful, Ambassador. Very insightful. Thank you very much. Ambassador Vaswani?
I'm in an interesting situation. I came here in February.
You just didn't see anybody yet. Yeah, you haven't met anyone. So a lot has changed for you, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I came here excited. I had a lot of things on my agenda. I had the Dubai Expo. I had a whole series of ideas, a whole series of meetings lined up. And as my colleagues have mentioned, the nature of diplomacy, you want to meet people. You want to look people in the eye. You want to look at body language. You want to see the nuances. We want to send some nuances, but well, we couldn't. And then they offered me the first virtual presentation of credentials, and I thought this is cool. So we did it, and I'm very grateful to the ministry for organizing that. I was hopeful that things would ease up a little bit during Eid, that maybe I could go for some of these, the iftars before and some of the events during, but that was not to be the case. So I figured rather than waiting, my challenge is that I don't have this diplomatic capital established in advance. Ludovic and Peter have met people over the past year, I guess, or two. And you know people personally, and it's easier to build that chemistry, to bring that chemistry online. You're meeting with someone you've met in the past. So for me, well, I don't have that option. So let's dive in straight. And I put in my TPNs to MOFA. I said, let's have video calls instead. And I'm reaching out. We've had good conversations. I've had a whole series of video meetings. Some of it I would have preferred to meet in person, but I see this as a way of teeing up an interaction. And then we can meet in person in the future. With Dubai, I thought it was pretty cool. I met Dewa, I met RTA, and I looked in my colleague from Dubai. We had really good conversation. I looked in our Enterprise Singapore colleagues to follow up on the business. So like Peter mentioned, maybe going forward, some meetings I will say, let's prioritize. Some meetings I need to meet in person, and some meetings maybe let's keep up the video interactions. At the end of it, as a diplomat, our job is to build bridges, to find opportunity. And I can do it in person, I can do it through video. But that day, a colleague from the diplomatic community invited me for lunch, and we sat opposite each other at the table. We had a meal, a glass of wine. It was nice, It felt, talking over video is awesome, but meeting in person, having that banter, it's convivial. But that's not an option at this point in time. So we will deal with video. I'm also meeting, I also want to engage my fellow Singaporeans. International Day receptions are a bit tough at this point in time. So I'm reaching out through them by video as well. Have a conversation. Alongside with them, my thumbs are really tired. I've been WhatsApping a lot. I've been saying hello. I think that's how I said hello to you as well. I got your contact. I reached out. I said hi, and then we sort of kept up. I forwarded stuff, and we kept up contact as well. We've worked the phones. I picked up the phone, had lots of phone conversations, and it can be done. At the end about it, like I said, COVID is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. We are in it for the long haul, and I think we have to work around it. We have to find creative solutions, and we will thrive. Yeah, new opportunities will come up. And one final point: a lot of people are interested in knowing what's happening in Singapore. And ironically, COVID, how we're dealing with COVID, gave me a story to share, to talk about. And maybe it incentivized them to pick up the phone and talk to me. So, in adversity, we find opportunity. Thank you.
That's right. That's right. Thank you very much, ambassadors. Packed a lot, truly. And I think some of the main themes we've covered are the necessity of being prepared, the necessity of being adaptable, and the key importance of multilateralism. So thank you again very much. I hope that we will get to see you again very soon. Appreciate generosity of your time, and stay safe, keep well. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.